Larson, Executive Editor of Power Magazine, and today I'm joined by our senior editors, Sonal Patel and Darrell Proctor, and we're going to be previewing the April 2025 issue of Power Magazine. And in the April issue, our cover focus was on gas power. Sonal, you wrote the article for the feature. Can you talk a little bit about some of the information included there and the takeaways?
Yes, of course. So I've covered the market dynamics of gas power for a decade and a half, maybe more, but the shift over the past 2 years has been extraordinary. So a few years ago, we were writing really good stories about gas power's role as an essential bridge, mainly to bolster the renewables as utilities have pushed more towards net zero. And so now what's happened is essentially the market has flipped. So what's going on in the backdrop is this intense hunger for power, which is being driven by data centers and industrial expansion and electrification. And at the same time, there's big concerns about reliability. And so what it boils down to is this really urgent need for new capacity at speed. So utilities and power companies are scrambling, and they're really working hard to procure enough capacity in the near term. And for the answer, it is gas power. Because of its maturity and viability. But from the deep research that I did into the utility earnings space, it seems the big pain is procurement, and folks are really scrambling to secure gas turbines, and OEMs can't seem to make them fast enough. So we're talking about all types of gas turbines, heavy duties, aeros, industrial turbines. I talked to many different experts from EPRI, a lot of the other OEMs, and the numbers are really staggering. The lead times are stretching beyond 2029. Manufacturers are overwhelmed with record backlogs and competition for other critical components. And this isn't even competition from the power sector alone. It's coming from industry and aviation. And we're looking at a 5-year plus wait for new installs, and some utilities are really forced to book new turbine slots, which is a very interesting development for our industry years in advance just to keep pace. So the story is really looking deeply into what utilities do next. You know, do they double down on gas? Do they rethink their approach to reliability planning? What are we going to see? There's a wave of strategic partnerships, repowering. Are we going to look at unconventional procurement just to keep the lights on? And so there's a lot of interesting input from lots of different people, and I hope you guys can check it out.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting situation that they're dealing with in the industry. So thanks for that, Sonal. Next on our list of features, we dove into electrification as a topic. And Darrell, you wrote an article that touched on some of the industry experts that you interviewed. And can you talk a little bit about what they shared with you?
Those that have followed this space over the past few years, there was really a full court press for electrification from the commercial and industrial sector, certainly from business. What we're seeing now is that some of that enthusiasm is tempered because the U.S. government is really pushing more toward fossil fuels as opposed to supporting electrification. They've already pulled funding for the national EV charging network, which certainly is expected to impact transportation electrification. The experts that I talked to said that what's really going to need to happen now is the private sector and market forces are going to have to step up to drive electrification. They can no longer count on government policies that support electrification, at least in the near term. What that could look like is tech companies moving in and saying, we have technologies for electrification, for commercial, industrial, for residential. We want to work with the utilities. And then it's just a matter of convincing the utilities that this is also in their best interest. Sonal mentioned about demand, and that was one of the things when people first looked to electrification a few years ago and how much demand that was going to involve and how utilities were going to do that. So I think what the companies that I talked to are all like, look, we're trying to find utilities that will work with us to create these incentives for C&I and residential spaces, recognizing that that would then help them with their electrification initiatives. The question is, again, at this point, the return on investment for those utilities. Is it in their best interest to continue to push electrification when the government support is not going to be there? So part of what that look like, again, will be, microgrids, virtual power plants, those kind of things. And again, the technology that companies are going to be looking at, are they going to continue to put that money into manufacturing for electrification, particularly if the tax credits are no longer there for that? It's an interesting time for electrification. Most of the folks that I talked to said, electrification's not going away. It's probably going to be slowed, and the private sector is going to have to step up to continue to support it.
It'll definitely be interesting to see how that plays out under the Trump administration and going forward. So thanks for that, Darrell. Also along the electrification lines, we had a contributed article from Gordon Feller, and that article was on flywheel energy storage technology and how it was being used in the port of Rotterdam as part of their electrification initiative. So that's another interesting article focused on electrification. Also, some other contributed articles in this issue of Power Magazine involve project management. We had an article contributed by a company, Barclay Damon, that's on EPC contract management best practices. So I hope people will check that out. A lot of great information in that article. We also had an article contributed by KEPCO, the Korea Electric Power Company. That article focused on a battery intelligence management system that the company developed and how it's being used to safely and efficiently manage energy storage systems. Also in the April issue, we've got several articles focused on geothermal energy, which I think is a really important green, clean energy source that is making great progress in many different areas, not only in the US, but around the world. Also, we've got a focus on energy storage systems. There's an article in this issue on Second Life EV batteries and how they're being used on grid scale energy storage systems. Also, another article on simplifying the battery energy storage system and designing smarter, more reliable energy storage systems. We also have a feature Marnie Surface Blow article. That's our fictional character who is an engineer. Marnie solves engineering problems usually in a very unique manner. And in this case, she's working on an air-cooled condenser mystery and trying to figure out some problems at a power plant in New Mexico. Another article that we've got is focused on emissions control and how direct injection SCRs are being used to lower NOx and CO emissions at data center installations in particular. And that article was contributed by EnergyLink and is very interesting on that direct injection SCR system. In our Global Monitor section, we've also got several articles that, Darrell, you worked on one about China and coal-fired generation. Can you talk a little bit about that article?
Yeah, Aaron. China leads the world in renewable energy and also is far and away the leader in coal-fired generation capacity. The country began building almost 95 gigawatts of new coal-fired generation capacity last year, which was its most in about a decade. And it's interesting, China, to be honest, China's taking a lead role worldwide in not only its own build out of generation capacity, but in the export of its technology across the board for any place that's continuing to build coal-fired power plants, certainly the renewable energy systems, and also for nuclear power. It's going to be the thinking is that they see a real opportunity here to continue to expand their global influence over all manner of energy production. Most of the folks who I talked with regarding China's build out of coal-fired power plants cited economics and increased industrialization, which of course is increasing energy demand. And China, even though the country has set goals to reduce its emissions, government officials have also said, you know what, we need this baseload power. We're going to continue to utilize coal-fired generation. It's also the world's leading importer and obviously consumer of coal, well ahead of now India, the second largest global buyer of coal. And that gap between China and India is at its widest margin since at least 2013. China imported nearly 545 million metric tons of coal last year, which was more than twice what India imported. So not only is China, the place where folks are going if they're still in the coal-fired generation business, it's also become the place that other countries are saying, you know what, we can sell our coal to China. And that is really driving the economy in China. And it's going to be interesting to see how they continue to build out coal-fired generation.
It will definitely be interesting. So thanks, Darrell. Sonal, you, of course, do the big picture infographic every month, and I always look forward to seeing what you feature in that. This month, you wrote about or featured demand surging globally. Can you touch on some of the takeaways from that graphic that you came away with?
Absolutely. And so in January, the International Energy Agency released a flagship report, annual report, Electricity 2025. And what it did was lay out in a comprehensive way global electricity demand, which is a big topic that we've been working to make sure that our readers are aware of. The report looks through 2027, and the findings are really striking because it says that the world is entering an era of really unprecedented electricity consumption, demand projected to grow nearly 3,500 terawatt hours, which is the equivalent of adding Japan's annual electricity use every year, which is huge. And then so most of it is going to be led by emerging markets. Like Darrell mentioned, China and India will account for 85% of the growth. And a lot of this is being driven by rapid industrialization, expanding use of air conditioning, and the rise of data centers and AI infrastructure, which a lot of the advanced economies are seeing, but China and India is particularly so also. And then in advanced economies, which is most of the Western world, they are actually reversing a 15-year trend of stagnant demand. They're seeing lots of new consumption from new sectors like semiconductor manufacturing, electrified transport. But a key part of the infographic is going to try to show that the challenges remain, especially in Europe, where high power prices are affecting are dampening industrial recovery.
Yeah, another interesting feature. So thanks for that. And speaking of India, Darrell, you actually wrote about how they're expanding renewable energy resources. Can you just touch a little bit on that?
Yeah, so Sonal mentioned China and India, and India on the renewable energy side, they're really trying to ramp up and develop their renewable energy resources. As an example, government data that I looked at for this particular article said that more than 100 gigawatts of solar power capacity was in place at the end of January in India, and another 84 gigawatts, or basically, almost doubling that installed capacity, is in the construction phase. There's another almost 50 gigawatts in the tendering phase. Indian officials have said, we really want to build out renewable energy. We want cleaner forms of energy. They still have about 240 gigawatts of installed coal-fired capacity, but they're trying to pull back on coal-fired generation, or at least that's the government has made a commitment to do that. Now, that said, other folks have pointed out that there's about 100 gigawatts of new coal-fired generation in India that's proposed or under construction right now. Again, you can look at China and everything that China is doing on the renewable and coal-fired generation side, basically double what India is doing. But for both of those countries, they are far and away ahead of anywhere else in the world when it comes to both renewables and coal-fired generation. A big thing with India on the renewable side is solar power. And it was interesting. I was at the Intersolar conference in San Diego in late February. It was really striking the number of India headquartered companies that were at the event showcasing their technology. And, in conversations with some of those folks, they said that they, global other countries that are looking to build out solar power are looking at technology coming from India for several reasons. Part of it is obviously that the technology is now more widely available. Apparently, Indian companies are at a point where they can build this technology and perhaps at a lower cost. And also, India is really pushing exports of its technology the same way China is. So India is at a place where I think officials there are saying, you know what, we have this opportunity. We need to be taking advantage of it. And here's how we're going to do that. So I think one thing that you can look at is even more manufacturing plants in the United States from Indian companies that want to have manufacturing here so that they can more easily have their technology in place for U.S. solar power developers.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thanks, Darrell. The last Global Monitor piece, Sonal, you wrote, it talks about Europe and the risks that they face without immediate action on dispatchable energy. Can you touch a little bit on that article?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this came out of the focus that we had this month on gas power and the cover feature. So if you start to consider global priorities, it really becomes clear that dispatchability is actually a growing concern everywhere. So the feature that I wrote for Global Monitor really, it stems from an important call from ETN Global, which is an international trade group which is focused on advanced gas turbine technology. It has some big players in the gas power space. It warns that without urgent investment in dispatchable power, especially thermal turbines running on hydrogen and synthetic fuels, the grid is going to struggle to keep up with rising demand. One part that's really important, interesting, is that by 2030, flexibility needs in Europe are expected to double. And by 2050, they're supposed to increase fivefold. But at the same time, Europe is on track to lose more than 100 gigawatts of dispatchable power within the decade. So the article really just gets into what this means for Europe's energy security, and how and whether or not the grid is prepared for this transition.
All right, thanks, Sonal. And the last article I'll touch on is my Speaking of Power column. And in this month's Speaking of Power, I mentioned our new Power Industry Market Index, which is an interesting metric that we put together. It features 50 companies that are part of the index, and it basically looks at and tries to gauge what direction the industry is moving. It's ranked from 0 to 100. It's not like a standard financial index per se. It looks at much more than just the market price of these stocks, but it focuses on projections and the future and what the prospects are going forward. And as I said, it should rank from 0 to 100. In most cases, it's probably going to be around that 50 to 60, maybe 70 mark is kind of what I'm expecting. We developed this back in October, and we've been tracking it now for for several months to kind of see how it's manipulating and changing after the election. We expected some changes to happen. When we first originated it back in October, the rank was 59.4 out of 100. And since the election, it actually moved up. So it's now sitting at 60.8, and we'll be watching it moving forward and basically watching the relative changes within that index to see where that market is headed. In the most recent case, we saw upticks in engineering firms, construction contractors, OEMs, and to a lesser extent, software and hardware suppliers. The index also includes utilities. The utilities kind of averaged out. They didn't move a lot up or down. And so it'll be an interesting thing looking forward, and you can we'll be tracking it and putting out email to subscribers with updates on it and what's been happening. So I hope people will find that useful. And with that, I guess we've pretty much covered the April issue of Power Magazine for 2025. So thank you for watching, and we hope you'll read our April issue. So thank you, everyone.